Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming. Today, we're going to hear Soma Sara speak. She is a multi-award winning activist, author, speaker, and CEO of Everyone's Invited, a platform for individuals to anonymously share their experiences with sexual assault. In June 2020, Soma began sharing some of her personal experiences on Instagram, and in light of the overwhelming responses by people who resonated with her stories, she founded this movement. In April 2021, Everyone's Invited triggered a groundbreaking Ofsted review in schools, looking at safeguarding policies and practices relating to sexual abuse. It has now been launched in devolved administrations around the UK and has provoked new guidelines for review for sexual misconduct in schools and beyond. Tonight's event is being filmed for possible inclusion in a documentary, so if anyone would rather not feature in it, please let anybody from the production team know tonight at the end of the event. We're now going to listen to Soma introduce herself for 10 minutes or so please enjoy.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming here this evening. It's really wonderful to be here, and your presence means a lot to me, so I really appreciate that you would take the time. It feels surreal to be here. It's such an iconic institution and university and just hall and union as well. So I think I'm going to begin with just telling you a little bit about myself and about my journey, and then we're going to move on to some questions and then open up the questions to you guys. I'm really looking forward to hearing from you and to hearing your views and your perspective and your experiences as well. So thank you again for coming. I am the founder of Everyone's Invited, which is a charity and a place for survivors to share their stories, completely anonymously. We deliver specialist education in schools, and this is designed to empower school communities to promote healthy relationships, equal, loving, respectful relationships, and build an understanding of sexual well-being, and also to tackle rape culture. So our overall mission is to expose and eradicate rape culture with empathy, compassion, and understanding. So it's been quite an overwhelming few years for me, and I think I'll start back at the beginning in June 2021. And like you guys, I was at university, I was at UCL studying English Lit, and I was doing my finals. For context, it was the beginning of the pandemic. It was the beginning of the very first lockdown as well. And it was during that time of great social upheaval. It was Black Lives Matter. There was a lot of people speaking out online, a lot of people sharing really personal and traumatic experiences, and this kind of spirit of activism and a desire and a will to tell a story. And it was also in that period where we were all stuck at home, all on our phones, all online, all watching Netflix. And I came across Michaela Cole's I May Destroy You. And I'm sure many of you have heard of this extraordinary show, but I think it really had a profound impact on me, my understanding of the kind of array of sexual violence and the many different behaviors and experiences that survivors can have. And it also really influenced my kind of approach to Everyone's Invited, in how Michaela Cole shows these really complex and nuanced, incredible characters in all different lights. And she's showing them capable of such loving goodness and kindness and support, but equally capable of harm and destruction and hurting their friends. So it's really showing all of the different characters moving between these positions, between the role of perpetrator to victim, to survivor, to active bystander, to complicit bystander. So you see all the characters move between these roles, and then you just come to an understanding that no one can be reduced to a one-dimensional existence, and actually, we're all really complicated, and we're all a part of we've been influenced and riddled by our experiences and our upbringings and our socialization and our understanding and perspective of the world. So I've definitely gone on a very big tangent. But so it was during that time I was watching that TV show, and I started having lots of discussions with some of my best friends. And we began talking and speaking, and we just began to realize how many of us had experienced sexual violence and harassment and abuse. And these incidents, they didn't feel rare, they didn't really feel one-off. It just felt, looking back, that they were totally normalized, totally accepted, and it just happened, and they happened without questions and little repercussions as well. They were very much entrenched into our lived experiences and into our daily lives, particularly throughout those teenage years, very, incredibly formative, vulnerable years. So at the time, I don't think we really had the courage to challenge the behavior. I don't think we had the knowledge to kind of really comprehend what was happening to us. And we didn't have the language. We couldn't really articulate a lot of what was going on. And therefore, there was no kind of medium to express it. There was no way to really kind of share those experiences with the people in our lives, whether it was with each other or whether it was the kind of responsible adults, teachers, parents. And ultimately, I began to understand how much the trauma I experienced in those years has kind of affected me in my adult life and in my friends and my peers, and how much of the trauma we experience, it was complex, and it came in many forms, and it was overt, it was covert. In some cases, it was immediate, some repressed, some delayed. But ultimately, we all kind of came back to the same thing of, this is life-changing. It really transformed our life experience and had such a profound impact on our mental health, on the way we interacted with others, on the way that we communicated, on our sense of self, on our self-worth, and general happiness and ability to live fulfilling lives. It really influenced our relationships and our interactions, and it was kind of unending. And again, these are probably the most vulnerable and formative moments, those really early years where you're just, you're coming out in this world and you're discovering who you are and who you love and what you like and what you're interested in, and you're just there and, in that moment, and you should have the right to live freely and safely and to love without fear and without fear for that these experiences can happen to you. So I also thought I was going to read a little bit, a section from my book, just to kind of like encapsulate what I'm talking about and give you a sense of the kind of environment and the culture that I'm referring to. Growing up, misogyny, sexual harassment, and sexual abuse online was normalized amongst my peers. Libraries of nudes of underage girls were shared on Google Drives. Being groped and grabbed at a party was normal, as were the unwanted advances, the rape jokes, sexual bullying, and unsolicited dick pics. Boys received and girls gave. There was a pressure to engage in sex acts, pressure that wasn't visible per se, or always clear as to where it came from at the time, but it felt like this pre-established component to our existence. In a world of sex without dating, where brutal double standards shame girls as sluts for having sex, but boys were rewarded, assaults were not rare. So I believe and I know that these environments were characterized by a culture of abuse and harassment, and it really did have a profound and severe impact on my mental health and my confidence in my relationships over time. And ultimately, I'm talking about a culture where attitudes and behaviors and beliefs in society have the cumulative effect of normalizing and trivializing sexual violence. And this is an incremental culture. Everything is connected. We have the attitudes, the ideas, the misogyny, the sexism, which is bleeding into the language, the way we interact with each other, the behavior. And then at the end, we have the violence, we have rape, we have murder. So it's really about painting a picture of this entire society and understanding how For example, when the non-consensual sharing of intimate photos are normalized, this can actually act as a gateway to more extreme experiences of rape and assault. So rape is the end point of this culture. And ultimately, it's about really trying to communicate how when any individual is dehumanized, worn down by the everyday comments, by the sexism, by the groping, by the grabbing, by the following, by the shaming, they become vulnerable to violence. So I've already mentioned my book, but I had a really wonderful opportunity to write a book in the aftermath of this experience. And I wanted to give you a little bit more of an idea about what I'm talking about. And it's really, it's a collection of essays, and it's really about trying to get to the root causes of this culture. And it's my attempt of interrogating and trying to understand how we can live in a society that allows sexual violence and misogyny and abuse to exist and thrive without any repercussions. And in the book, I talk a lot about the impact of overly restrictive gender scripts and norms, unhealthy forms of masculinity and unhealthy forms of femininity. And I talk about the impact of the mainstreaming of hardcore pornography, the impact of porn on our lives, on our sex lives, and also the digital revolution of the social world and the modern sexual landscape, what it means to come of age online, and the intersection of abuse and misogyny, sexual violence with the digital world. And then I talk about intersectionality and how different forms of discrimination are overlapping and intersecting to create unique experiences of discrimination, and the impact of the language that we use, and also self-objectification and the male gaze and the backlash of Everyone's Invited, and I'm sure we'll get onto that. But yeah, so that's me. Thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate that you're here, and I'm really excited to answer some questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Soma, and for the incredible work that you are doing and continue to carry out every day. I was just wondering, so you mentioned your book a lot. What was the experience like writing it? Was it cathartic? Did it bring back traumatic memories? Do you want to just delve into that a moment?
Of course. It was a really challenging experience. I think writing a book for anyone is really hard. Obviously, I'd never written a book before. It definitely brought back a lot of, traumatic times, and it was a little bit very triggering at times. And I think I also wrote it in the aftermath of kind of the explosion of Everyone's Invited in the media, and this kind of enormous national conversation that was provoked by the testimonies and Everyone's Invited and the stories. So I was kind of reeling from that. And it was obviously such an extreme life experience to have your kind of face being plastered on the cover of the Times and losing your anonymity and being kind of the poster child for rape culture and sexual violence. Not exactly, everyone's cup of tea. But it was an amazing kind of learning experience for me. A lot of my book and the process of writing it is obviously doing a lot of research and reading a lot, and it was really incredible to read about kind of the history of feminism and just do a lot of research with the academia in this area, and just feeling, I think that made me feel a lot more affirmed and not alone in like the activism, and realizing, wow, there's decades of work, centuries even, of people who are kind of fighting the cause and fighting for equal rights. And I was going to say one more thing, but I've completely forgotten it.
No, don't worry. I just thought maybe to set the tone of the discussion, you mentioned rape culture a lot, and I think it's one of those terms that does kind of get thrown around a lot, and it's taken on sometimes some sort of vague connotations to it. So do you want to explain what you mean by it?
So yeah, I think that's a really important kind of topic to tackle, and it's something that has been, I guess, controversial, even using that phrase, the term rape culture. My definition is it is when beliefs and attitudes in society have the effect of normalizing and trivializing sexual violence. And it's understanding this incremental culture. It's like this slippery slope where you're having the attitudes and the beliefs feeding into the language, which then impacts the behavior and the experiences, and then ultimately leads to violence. So it's like, looking at that from this kind of cultural perspective. It's not saying that everyone is a rapist. It's been such a challenging term, and we've had so many internal debates about it. There's been a huge amount of backlash about it, actually, because it kind of provokes this almost like cognitive dissonance, because obviously people don't want to believe that rape is normalized in society. Surely it's not normalized, surely rape is abhorred. But the reality, when you look at the stats and the facts and the kind of levels of violence and abuse, when you have kind of the porn, the extreme sadomasochistic, hardcore pornography that everyone is watching every day that's totally normalized, when you have a criminal justice system that has effectively decriminalized rape, when 1.4% of all victims of all cases actually lead to a prosecution. So there's a 1 in 70 chance of your rapist being charged. So that's basically effective decriminalization when you have a kind of rape jokes in the everyday, when you have violence and rape being literally sanctioned by porn and the media and in the films we watch and in the language we use. When you really look into it and you really kind of open your eyes, it is normalized. And so it's this that cognitive dissonance. And also, I guess, this kind of almost like igniting a discussion. So it has that shock factor. And I think, yes, to some it might be off-putting, it might be isolating, it might make people tense up and get really defensive, they misunderstand it. But it also, without a doubt, generated an extraordinary national conversation that captivated millions of people. So it's, a double-edged sword. It's a really difficult thing, and we're always trying so hard to work on our language and our approach to try and find a balance. So that's why we say exposing and eradicating rape culture with empathy, compassion, and understanding. And that's really intentional and really important.
No, amazing. You've raised a lot of important points there. I think we can just focus on how you specify how, of course, this movement is very normalized in society. And I think it's quite easy also to become quite desensitized to personal, the experiences people go through. And it's quite hard to sometimes call them out. So what kind of advice do you have for women, but men as well, on kind of encouraging them to overcome the sense of shame that sort of shrouds coming forward? And of course, if you have a justice system that doesn't maybe recognize these crimes for what they are a lot of the time, how do you kind of advise people to continuously challenge the system?
I think, number one, keep talking about it, keep having the discussions. It's so important to keep this topic alive, and educate yourselves. Be great if you read my book, if possible, or any of the other so many activists and writers and incredible, feminists throughout history who are doing amazing job at looking at these topics. But education is really important. And even just being here with me today, that's a huge step. Even just having this conversation, we're opening up a discussion, we're destigmatizing rape, which is taboo, which, has connotations of violence and brutality, and people are scared to talk about it. But when we don't talk about an issue and we don't address it, then it prevails and it continues, and we brush it under the carpet and we pretend it doesn't exist, and then people suffer. So the whole point and the kind of mission statement of Everyone's Invited is about platforming those stories. It's about giving survivors a voice and helping them speak out and actually raise awareness and destigmatize rape and sexual assault and sexual violence And all of these really difficult, triggering, traumatic experiences, they need to be spoken about because otherwise they will not be addressed and they will continue.
Thank you. So you mentioned the backlash just there on Everyone's Invited, and you mentioned to me that it's kind of getting worse now. So where do you think the status quo stands on rape culture now? Are we seeing an increase in accountability among boys, men, or not?
It's a really good question, and I think it's a really tough one to answer because, I mean, it's hard. I don't have my ear on the ground in like every room, every place, every conversation, and it's hard to know. I feel like the pendulum is always swinging, and you feel like you've made some progress and you've changed people's minds and you've engaged people in the discussion, but then, you know, you feel like it really goes backward and something big happens in the media or some, you know, someone who has a massive cultural influence and following on social media, who is very alpha male and angry and, you know, gets an incredible amount of attention and wall-to-wall media coverage, and then you feel like, wow, we really haven't made any progress. Yeah. It's tough. It's constantly kind of, you make gains and then you have losses. And I think it's always been like that. Whenever there's been any kind of change throughout history, there's always been a backlash, especially with social change. And we see that. We see that with Me Too. And then we have Roe v. Wade. I mean, it's... Yeah.
No, definitely. You mentioned an alpha male personality, I think. I think we can kind of bring Andrew Tate in the conversation. So do you think that he's just another kind of influencer, media personality? He's been described as like satirical by his lawyers. Or do you think there is something within him that represents kind of backsliding in the movement? And yeah, is he just more than just a personality? That's what I'm trying to...
So I think it is kind of, without a doubt, Andrew Tate has had, you know, a tremendous amount of attention. And he has galvanized literally like millions. And he has a huge social following. His views have billions of, his TikTok videos have billions of views. But it's really important to understand that, you know, this is just part of a much wider societal trend and context of misogyny and extremism. And, you know, if we deplatform Tate, if we jail him, the problem's not going to go away. It's still going to exist. Sexism, misogyny online, you know, image-based abuse, digital sexual violence, it's still going to happen. And it's really key to understand that, and also understanding how, you know, when we give him wall-to-wall media coverage, when, you know, we do things like this, we play into, we almost risk lionizing him, which is exactly what he wants. And sorry, I'm kind of like, but yeah, so we're kind of playing into this kind of exactly what he wants us to do, and he's becoming this like martyr, and we're giving him all the attention. When actually the problem is so much bigger than him.
Yeah,
and it's not just him. But also, I think the other really important thing to mention and highlight and kind of push to the front of the agenda is the context of social media, and how is it in this day and age, you know, we are so vulnerable to indoctrination. We are so easily influenced online because we have these algorithms reinforcing, reaffirming a point of view, right? Even for me, I don't follow Andrew Tate. I have no interest. I mean, I'm interested because I'm kind of fascinated by how someone could, you know, obviously kind of cannibalize so much attention, but I don't actively search him out. But I watched one video and my entire feed is just full of Andrew Tate content. And it's really shocking. And can you imagine, I guess I'm imagining maybe a young boy or anyone really who is kind of just watching a few of his videos, how quickly you can be kind of indoctrinated. And that's not just with Andrew Tate, it's kind of with any kind of extremist figure or view. Social media is an echo chamber, and it's a huge problem.
No, definitely. So you say the digitalization of kind of these issues. I guess Everyone's Invited is the most obvious and immediate counteraction to that, because a lot of it is online. I know you have educational programs in school as well, but it started off as an online platform. What are the kind of benefits and shortcomings of this? Because in terms of accessibility and awareness beyond the digital kind of moment, I think it's quite easy to just say, oh, that's a digital phenomenon, but it's obviously not. So, yeah, do you have any thoughts?
I think we would not exist without social media. That was the place where the stories were shared and the movement was shared, and where it galvanized the attention and it allowed people to access us and understand our mission and become a part of it and share their stories. And that was really important. And we were going viral on Instagram and on TikTok, and millions of views on all of these different platforms. And it's extraordinary that, social change can happen on these platforms, and, they can have a real impact in the real world. But again, it's that double-edged sword. It's obviously also a space where we are very vulnerable to indoctrination to extremism, and harmful ideas, ideologies, and violence. And it's also a place where the abuse happens, where predators exist. And again, it's anonymity. It's like double-edged sword. Anonymity was essential for survivors to share their stories, because sexual violence is shrouded in such stigma and shame. They needed to be anonymous to be able to speak out openly. But again, the veil of anonymity creates so many problems with trolls and bullies and horrific kind of bullying on social media, and also image-based abuse and sexual and digital forms of sexual violence also plays into that. So many wonderful, amazing, progressive things, and so many terrible, destructive, harmful things. So it's a mixed bag.
Just touching on that idea of anonymity, I think, as you said yourself, there's been a backlash against Everyone's Invited. And I think one of the kind of ideas that have been at the forefront of people's criticism has been kind of the shock value that it has had, and how it's been ruining men's lives and ruining boys' lives. And if it's anonymous, then it's easy to kind of come up with ideas to target individuals. How do you respond to this criticism, and how do you advise people who are trying to have conversations be told this kind of, I'm sure in some cases it can be a reality, but it is quite disheartening when that's the response that people automatically go to.
I think ultimately it's like it's a misunderstanding of, it's anonymous. There are no names. There is nothing to be gained from sharing your story except catharsis, relief, and a chance to heal. And there is no targeting or naming or shaming of any individuals, and there never ever has been. So that's a really important thing. And the other thing is, this is such a difficult, challenging, stigmatized issue that so many survivors have suffered in silence for so long. Anonymity was truly the only way that they could actually speak out. I guess the other issue, the other thing that you touch on, the idea that it's ruining men and boys' lives, I think it's really important to understand that Everyone's Invited was about shifting the perspective and showing how sexual violence can destroy any survivor's life. And when people immediately respond in that way, I think it shows very clearly that kind of societal instinctual response to prioritize the reputations, promise, and lives of men over women. And what we're trying to say is, survivors matter too, and their lives and their experiences are valid. But what we're also trying to do is say that perpetrators and boys and men and, whatever gender you are, also matter. We have always, from the very beginning, encouraged compassion and empathy and nuance, and we have been on the receiving end of backlash, very fierce criticism backlash from our own community for encouraging empathy for boys and men. And we, ultimately, it truly is what it means. Everyone is invited. It is for everyone, because this is a culture, rape culture. You know, rape culture is advocating a patriarchal, repressive form of masculinity that is promoting stereotypes that are incredibly harmful to men's lives. Stereotypes such as, you know, men need to be entitled to sex, that they have an uncontrollable sexuality, that say that they have to be dominating and suppressing and only strong all the time and nothing else. You know, those stereotypes are responsible for an extraordinary male mental health crisis and a devastatingly high suicide rate amongst men. And what we're trying to say, and especially this is something that I argue in one of the first essays in my book, is that it's so important that men have opportunities to not just be strong and hard and kind of impenetrable constantly, but also are given the space and the opportunities to be compassionate, to be nuanced, to be loving, to be caring, to be vulnerable, to cry, to talk about mental health, to seek support, because that's being human. You need to have the space to experience all of those different things and to be able to, you know, behave in all of those different ways. And yeah, it's such an important message. This is a movement. And feminism in general, it's not anti-men, it's for men. It's for men and women. It's for equality. It's about leading with compassion and helping everyone.
Thank you. You kind of touched upon in your reply how everyone's invited. You know, you see it in the name. It's supposed to be universal. Everyone. It's for all people across the globe. Obviously now it's in the UK, but so hopefully we can kind of expand this culture. How do you reconcile not kind of being too universalist and like imposing ideas that are kind of developing now in the West? So you have countries where, you know, marital rape is still legal, sexual assault is not recognized in ways that are a lot worse than in the UK. But then you also don't want to be accused of kind of universalizing these practices at the expense of other people's cultures. So how do you kind of reconcile these two ideas?
So it's a really good question. And actually the question, it's definitely a challenging one. And I think it's really important to consider and to think about. And I think when you're looking at this from a global perspective, it's essential that you are being conscious and aware of the different cultural nuances and the traditions and backgrounds and races. And you know, also, I'm definitely not an expert in, I guess.
No, of course, you
globally,
focus in the UK.
Focus, but it's really important to be aware of that. But I do think that there is a shared project. There's like this shared movement of wanting compassion and love and fighting against dehumanization and violence. And I do think that there is something universal in that, because, you know, sexual violence is a universal experience, unfortunately. It can happen to anyone, anywhere, anytime, any country, any place. And it has happened and is happening and will happen. So I think there is that there's a shared value there and there's a shared movement. But again, it's really crucial to be aware of the differences too.
No, definitely. And I think sometimes just saying, like depicting all women as like victims, it can come sometimes at the expense of, you can strip them of their agency in a way. And I think it's very important to kind of focus on them as being survivors, which is what Everyone's Invited really focuses on, rather than defining them because of their experience.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one because it's a very personal kind of, I guess, terminology, and people prefer different things. So maybe in the immediate aftermath of something that's happened to you, you might feel more like a victim. But then as time goes on and you move forward and you grow and you heal, you may feel like a survivor. So it's kind of, you know, each to their own. But I do really love the word survivor. I think it's really powerful, and I think it's inclusive, and I think it also includes men and boys and any identity and gender, because, you know, that's something that's not spoken about and even more stigmatized is the violence that men and boys experience and male sexual abuse. And how, again, these patriarchal, really restrictive, oppressive forms of masculinity does not allow them to speak out about their experiences. It creates, they feel they should have fought him off, that they're not strong enough. It takes decades for men to share details of experiences of sexual violence as well. So we have always, since the very beginning of Everyone's Invited, spoken about this as well. And we've also received backlash from our community for doing that. So it's tough, but we firmly believe that this should be a place for everyone to share their stories, no matter who you are. Everyone should have a voice.
Thank you. I'm just going to have one more question before opening it up to everyone else. You've seen this project through, kind of, it's happening now, but I think the massive national attention that it received kind of is waning to an extent. How optimistic are you about the future when it comes to eradicating rape culture? And is it wrong to be optimistic? Does that kind of equate with a sense of complacency? Or do you think it's okay to think in these terms?
I think that's a really interesting question, and I think those words are really interesting too, thinking about optimism and complacency in the context of sexual violence and the movement and moving forward in feminism. And to me, I think optimism represents, hope and like almost like a will to change things and a desire to. And that doesn't feel complacent to me. And I think if you want to keep going, especially as an activist, especially in this era, you have to be optimistic. You have to try. You have to want something better. You have to dream, you have to want to imagine something different from the reality that you exist in, that you live in. I don't know if you've heard of or seen Women Talking yet, but really amazing Oscar-nominated film which touches on all of these issues. And the director calls it an act of female imagination. So it's about these women kind of imagining a life that is different from their experiences of being repeatedly raped in this like Mennonite community. But she talks about it as an act of female imagination. Like you need to be able to imagine, to hope for something more, something better, something different, and to envision that, to enact the change, to achieve that. So I think optimism is important, but it's hard to stay optimistic when things, are constantly, you feel like the backlash really grinds down on you. It's really difficult. There are things that happen in the media that it feels like you're being set back 10 steps all the time. And it's exhausting work. It's a very triggering subject. It's very emotional. People are very angry. It's very divided. And the world is so polarized. So it's really tough to kind of keep going.
Yeah, definitely. No, I can imagine. But I think the work you do is very heartening to a lot of people. And I think, there's a lot of people out there who are very grateful for it. So thank you. On that note, I'm going to open the floor to questions. So do we have any? Over there? Get a mic.
It sounds like one of the differences from your movement when compared to Me Too is the emphasis on anonymity. In Me Too, it was often, this is the abuser, these are the people who he's harmed, and the outcome is that that person in power will leave their position. I worry that with anonymity, that sort of change that talking about sexual assault can be taken away, and then maybe without a personal story, it maybe can diminish some of the impact. How do you, within Everyone's Invited, try to think about the question of anonymity?
It's a really fascinating question, and I really appreciate you asking it. And I've actually never been asked that question before. And I think that actually, with Me Too, it kind of had almost the opposite effect of, because it really focused on figures like, for example, Harvey Weinstein. And it almost made it feel like, in many cases that it's a bad apple situation. And he's the individual and we need to cancel him. And then we fix the problem. But of course, Me Too happened, many years ago, and the problem still exists. It's still there. It is, of course, Me Too made huge strides in furthering, I guess, feminism and the movement, but it was flawed. And I think what you miss there is this kind of wider context, this wider social, societal context of sexual violence, of misogyny, of discrimination and abuse, and how it permeates at so many different levels in society. And there are so many people involved in enabling and allowing. And it's not just about those individuals. Yeah, thank you.
Anybody else? Okay.
So kind of following on from that question, there was a lot of, I guess, previous to Everyone's Invited coming out with a massive list of schools where sexual assault was quite prominent. There's a lot of that attitude of like, oh, it doesn't happen here. This isn't really our problem. But kind of going on from that, I know Everyone's Invited does work with schools. How do you kind of envision kind of sexual education targeting that problem without almost re-emphasizing it by, it can become even more divisive if you have groups where rape culture has already affected them, that rape culture can almost like affect the way you're teaching sexual education because it's almost already too late to start opinions where everyone's accepting what's going on rather than instantly making it a joke. So how do you think you can target that?
It's a really good question. I think our approach at Everyone's Invited is really trying to like let them lead and like empowering them to engage. So we have like these small conversation sessions and they're in small groups, and it's more of like we kind of guide them and raise different topics, but it's about giving them the opportunity to share their perspective and to speak about things. So when you kind of have a different approach where you're kind of empowering young people to really engage and you're not just kind of like talking at them and telling them you did this and this is wrong and and it's actually more about this is everyone's responsibility. Let's all make a change together. Let's all become a part of this, and everyone has a voice here, including men and boys. Like, if not, your voice is equally as important and equally as probably, if not more important, in actually trying to bring about change. It shouldn't just be on women and girls and and marginalized people. Yeah, I hope that answered it a little bit. But I do agree that there is definitely sometimes difficulties in, I don't know, maybe bringing something up that is kind of like a touchy, difficult subject, and yeah, having maybe. But I think ultimately you've got to address it. You just have to. And in the long term, when this education is more established and built in and it's been there, then it will have its impact. But again, we do see the difference in speaking to older years, like sixth formers, versus speaking to the younger years. And it's so interesting, it's fascinating seeing how much more engaged the like 14, 15-year-old, like 13, 14-year-olds are, boys and girls. And they're just like so interested, so intrigued, willing to learn. But then I guess it's the sixth formers that are a bit more like, Yeah.
Can we get a mic over there?
Hi, thank you for your talk. So I'm slightly interested in how you chose to take, like, in my opinion, like what is like a bottom-up approach. So you're confronting like rape culture first, and perhaps confronting the inequalities in the judiciary system is a latter priority for you. So I was wondering on whether you think confronting rape culture first is necessary, or if you could go from the top up and try to confront judicial inequality in reference to like persecution of sexual violence.
That's a great question as well. And I think, to be honest, I was just like a graduate at uni, and I definitely didn't have any experience or knowledge about, I guess, that world and like the criminal justice system and the legal world. And I felt like my biggest kind of power and the only thing I really had was my voice. So I felt that was probably the most natural way to go. Yeah. At the time. But that's not to say that area isn't as important. And, you know, tackling rape culture, it needs to be holistic. It needs to be at every level. It's so crucial to address that area. But again, I'm not an expert, but there are many people who are.
Yes, please, over there. Can we get a mic? Thanks.
Hi, thank you for speaking to us today. I was in secondary school when Everybody's Invited came out, and my secondary school was on that list. And I remember it was like a big point of discussion in our year, or just I remember it being like lunchtime or something, and a lot of like me and my friends, we saw it, and we weren't necessarily surprised, but it felt quite affirming to like, I don't know, hear someone talk about it because everyone was quite like hush hush about things that happened at my school. So I was wondering what it was like if you've heard from people whose schools listed and like what that's been like. And also on the subject of like male friendship groups particularly and like secondary school male culture, like obviously that's not the only issue, but it it can be quite incessant and normalize the misogyny within, I feel like, a lot of UK secondary schools. What do you think is the best way of tackling that culture specifically? Because I know it's probably really hard, and obviously there's a lot of defensiveness sometimes. So, like, yeah, what do you think are the best ways to deal with that?
Great, thank you for those questions. Brilliant questions. First one, the list. So the intention of the list was to show that it was everywhere and in all schools, and I think we showed that with just the sheer number that we had. I don't have the exact number, but it was like tens of thousands of primary schools and secondary schools, and very mixed response from different schools. But I think it made a lot of schools like pay attention and really like try and take this area and issue seriously. And then it was, of course, the Ofsted report that actually made it a legal requirement for all schools to address this, because it confirmed that all sexual harassment and sexual abuse online had become totally normalized in schools, and that schools aren't going to pass the inspection unless they really look at this area. And then to your second question, I think that there are many approaches to be taken, so much that schools can do. But I think probably something that we are lacking as a society at the moment that I would really like to highlight is, I feel like, great male role models who are really showing like, I don't know, representations of positive masculinity who are super popular and prevalent and like really present in culture. I think, of course, people always say this, and I really stand by. People say Marcus Rashford, or even like most of the England team, a lot of them are mental health advocates and just seem like really kind and caring young men. But it doesn't. There seems to be a lack of really prominent male figures that are showcasing a more compassionate form of masculinity. That includes having the strength and the bravery to, help hold their friends accountable and to actually stand up for women and women's rights and survivors. And yeah, I mean, I know that there was that moment when Nadal and Djokovic held hands and cried, and that was such a brilliant, wonderful moment of vulnerability and care that was on display for men in such a, obviously public space. But I think male role models will have a huge impact. And it's kind of sad that that feels like one of the that they are lacking, and that maybe female role models aren't enough, and that sometimes men need men to influence them.
Anybody else? Over there? We got Mike.
Hey, I just wanted to ask about your interactions, especially kind of like in the genesis of Everyone's Invited with large institutions, and kind of obviously there's probably some stuff that you can't disclose, but in terms of that, why you focused on schools and whether you thought that there was a distinct difference between rape culture in schools and universities, and whether it kind of was a thing about universities essentially just almost having too much power to be fixed.
Interesting. So we focused on schools and education. I think it was more to do with my age and the age of my team and the volunteers and the team members. We were all like out of uni and just all students. And a lot of the stories and things that we were talking about were reflections on our teenage years and what happened in that time. So that, it was kind of schools was felt like the more natural place. And I think it was also just down to the people sharing the stories themselves. They wanted to talk about the schools. They wanted to talk about these institutions. And I guess school, university, similar forms and like similar ways that similar behavior in the way that rape culture is pervading and people are experiencing it. But I guess, there is a distinction in how it's kind of dealt with and treated. I feel like universities are more hands-off and more like, it's not my issue, and there's probably less pastoral care and like safeguarding obligations. And I think probably less kind of visible, accessible support, or like spaces to even talk about these issues in communities. And yeah, I think, yeah, I hope that was okay.
Any more questions?
Hello. So you spoke about kind of receiving backlash from your own community and like the feminist community, I guess, because there are so many divisions within it. How do you try to reconcile that with your work and kind of try to get everybody on board, at least with the main idea of what you're doing?
I think with backlash in general, coming back to those ideas of kind of communication and the tone and the language that we use. And it's about having the strength to actually sit down and have the discussion and try and get people on side and communicate with them. And it's really hard to ask someone to do that because it can be incredibly frustrating. But ultimately, we're not going to change anything by shouting and screaming and being angry and shaming. It's about debating and it's about, again, the values of this very chamber, seeing the different perspectives, being tolerant of different life experiences, and people may struggle to understand something which jars with their own life experience. If they've never seen sexual violence, sometimes it's hard for people to envision that it exists so prominently, so prevalently. So again, trying to have the empathy and the courage to have those conversations, building those bridges, trying, what do we have in common? How can we relate to each other? How can we communicate in a respectful and a loving way? And there's a lot to ask, especially of survivors who have suffered, who are triggered, who are going through it. But I don't really see that there's any other way if we want to move forward. I think it's really challenging in the context of the world that we're living in right now, in how divisive and polarized and angry and hostile the setting feels. Sometimes it feels even more intolerant day by day, and especially on social media. And it's sad when people won't even have a discussion. And yeah.
Over there, second row.
So I went to an all-girls school, and even then I was quite aware of like rape culture, and I think it's hard to avoid because of social media and the internet and things like that. Um, sorry, but I do know some people who came out and sort of, while they were at school, sort of didn't even register that sexism or misogyny or rape culture was even a thing. And similarly, I know I have like male friends who went to like progressive mixed schools and thought that, it wasn't really an issue. So I guess my question is, do you think that there are certain like pockets of society that are kind of immune to this, or do you think it permeates like everything, whether you think it does or not?
Thank you so much. I think it's everywhere. I think it permeates everywhere in all of society. And perhaps, those people maybe they were in denial, maybe they just didn't see it. But I do think maybe that's quite hard considering how prevalent, I don't know, I guess like lad culture, misogyny and rape culture is in schools. But yeah, it's definitely a hard one. Maybe there is a defensiveness there and an inability to confront bad behavior or harmful behavior and to want to change. You know, maybe they were content with the status quo and their position in power, and they didn't want change, really. They were resistant to that. So that's why our work is so focused around building empathy in all to understand what the impact of that kind of behavior actually is and what it can do to a person and how harmful and destructive it can be to be on the receiving end of misogyny and sexism and violence and harassment, especially even though they may be seen as low-level sexual transgressions, if they're happening every day, as they are, you know, with women, especially young women, young girls, if you're experiencing, you know, the fear of being followed home constantly, or, you know, you're being grabbed on the tube or like groped at a house party, or you have like an unsolicited dick pic, it's like, that's every single day. It's really, it kind of wears down on the soul. It can break a person. And it's that incremental dehumanization that ultimately leads to violence.
I think we have time for one more, so can we get a mic over there?
I was quite interested in what you were saying about like the difference in the responsiveness of certain age groups. And I guess I wanted to ask how you think we can navigate generational divides in this conversation, because I think that I know at my school, growing up in quite a rural conservative area, even if the school was taking accountability and sort of dealing with these cases head on, how do we then navigate potentially the people concerned going home and facing older family members who validate and accept or excuse these kind of behaviors, and just generally older generations being receptive to sort of a very social media and like I'd say youth-driven movement?
It's a really important question, and something that is very real. Every school we go to, the teachers complain about how hard they're trying to make a change and make a difference and focus on this area, and then how the kids are going home and they're having the opposite, and then there's such a backlash from the parents a lot of the time. And it's, again, I guess, that communication piece and having those discussions is so essential, that we need to bridge the generational gaps. Ultimately, they grew up in a completely different world. I mean, not totally different, of course. They experience sexism, misogyny, and sexual violence. It's always existed, but the way that we are experiencing it is different to how they experienced in the modern sexual landscape, in the digital revolution of the social world, in, you know, a place where porn is accessible anytime, any place, anywhere, and it's so embedded into our kind of lifestyle that it's normalized and everyone watches it. It's a very different landscape. So it's really important that they are beginning to familiarize themselves with the kind of world that we're growing up in. And yeah, I think just really trying to have those discussions, really trying to communicate with empathy. It's a really tough one. And I think, yeah, we've had a huge amount of backlash from parents in the older generation. And I think it's that it's an ignorance in the lack of understanding, because it jars with their perception of reality and life experience. They don't know, they weren't, you know, didn't receive a dick pic. Like, you know, it's completely a different world. It's hard to comprehend. So it's about reframing the way that we look at these issues. For example, for young people, the online and the offline, they're intrinsically linked. They're the same thing. It's like we are growing up, coming of age, developing relationships, communicating online. Like sex, online sex is real sex for a generation that has come of age in that time. So trying to communicate with them and get them to understand that is so important. And asking them to engage. And I think they are engaged, which is amazing. And I can see that. But there's obviously so much more work to be done, and it's always going to be a bit of a struggle, I think. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, Soma, for coming here today and having this important conversation with us. Would you all please join me in thanking Soma for coming?